Yo, what's up, YouTube? Today we are going to be remaking the lead arpeggiating synth from Ben Böhmer's Father Ocean remix, which sounds like this. That song is beautiful. It still gives me goosebumps. So let's get to recreating this arpeggiating lead synth patch. So the first thing we'll want to do is figure out what actual notes we need to put into our arpeggio, which I've already done, but it's worth your time to do it yourself, or maybe do it on a different Ben Böhmer song, because he is so good at writing catchy, beautiful, emotional melodies. Probably one of the best composers in electronic music right now. So definitely it was useful for me to go through this exercise. We can kind of imagine we're doing it. I would just find a not so busy part of the song, like right over here, the breakdown.
I close my eyes and I begin to see.
And then we'll just go over to our MIDI keyboard and we'll just try and copy that. And one tip is that spectrum analyzers can help you if you're not really sure of the note, especially this song has some vibrato. Sometimes the notes are a little bit in between, and the spectrum analyzer can kind of clear up what note is playing. Like, let's look at this. So if you could see, it's a little small on the metering tool I use, but I have a cursor here. I was highlighting the top note in the melody. So if you kind of do this, you can even slow down, warp and slow down the song, and you should be able to figure out the melody that way. Cool. So next up, let's start a fresh new track, copy our MIDI notes over, and we're ready to start dialing in our synth. So I'm going to choose Diva for this. I know Ben Böhmer uses that quite a bit. You can see in his resources he's posted with Production Music Live. This is one of his favorite synths. Seems to match the timbre of the song pretty well. And Diva is an awesome synth. I do recommend it because it works a little bit differently than some other soft synths. The creator of this has talked about how he uses techniques from Spice circuit simulation under the hood. And if you've seen any of my videos, I use Spice circuit simulation to figure out what's going on in the TR-808 and TR-606 and so on. So it's a really good tool for analyzing what circuits do, because you can simulate them with really high accuracy. Under the hood, this is using pretty similar techniques to that. So that's how this is able to do such a faithful analog modeling technique. It sounds really good, at least. And this is what the default init patch would sound like. Okay, so you can barely even hear it because we have so much, we have the cutoff frequency down so much. So the first thing I want to do is change this lag filter modulation to envelope 1 filter modulation. We can probably dial that back a little bit and hear what that sounds like. Okay, so there's our basic pluck sound in Diva, and now that we can actually hear it, you can hear there's a reverb on by default. I think that's probably the reverb Ben Böhmer used. It sounds pretty similar, but we can disable that for now just while we're getting the guts of this patch set up. And then let's change our mode from polyphonic to monophonic. Cool, so with that out of the way, let's start dialing in our envelope 1, which is, by the way, this is hard-coded to our volume, and then we've set it to our filter modulation. So this is going to essentially control our volume and our cutoff frequency at the same time. So let's bring this attack down to something like 5%, sounds good. Decay, somewhere less than 20%, pretty short. And then our sustain, I'm actually going to modulate by the end of this patch, but let's put it at 50% for right now. And then I'm going to add a little bit of velocity control. So put this up to 50%. And then I think that should change the envelope amount to the filter and to the volume, depending on which velocity we dial in. Next up, let's dial in our oscillators. So I'm going to choose this DCO, digitally controlled oscillator. And then I'm going to go from this feedback mode to high pass filter post, or actually high pass filter pre. And then let's play this and bring up the noise amount. So around 40 sounds good. And then I think there's not so much fundamental when I listen to the Ben Böhmer version. So let's bring this high pass filter up to like 90. Around 84 sounds good. Cool. And the next thing I want to do is add some kind of swelling to this cutoff frequency. If you listen to the Father Ocean track, it's not really just like a pluck consistent through the whole time. It's really evolving. There's a lot of motion going on. So let's add in some LFOs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add LFO2 as the second modulation source to our cutoff frequency. Actually LFO1. And then what I want to do is, just while I'm dialing this in, I'm going to turn off envelope 1. So right now, with envelope 1 on, it sounds like this. We have that pluck. I'm going to turn that off and just focus on what the LFO is adding to our sound. Which you can hear right now, it's actually doing nothing. But now we want to dial this in until we start to get that swelling sound. So I can turn up the amount. It's still not really doing much. I think I have to turn this delay down, depth mod, rate mod down. Okay, so now it's doing a whole lot. I think I can turn this polarity on maybe so it doesn't go negative. I think that's how that works. I'm actually not so sure of how all the Diva controls work. They're a little mysterious, but that's okay. Maybe let's make this really slow, like a slowly evolving wave. It's still a lot, but that's okay. And this random restart, I think, is why it's sounding so kind of chaotic. Let's turn that to just single. Okay, so the rate somewhere around 0 actually sounds best. And then what I want to do is I don't want this LFO to be super consistent. I want this to really evolve, be organic. And it will. The downside of that is we're never really going to exactly match the Ben Böhmer song because part of this is going to be like a little random or not super synced with time, or it's not super synced with the track. But that's okay. I'm sure if Ben Böhmer is using Diva, if he's using analog modeling stuff, it's not always about perfection and dialing in the exact sound. It's about setting up something that sounds good, and it's not going to always be reproducible, but that's okay. So I'm going to set up LFO2 as a modulation source for the rate. So we're going to kind of control how fast this LFO1 opens up, and then bring the mod up quite a bit. And then maybe we can add LFO2 also to the depth. So kind of when LFO2 is high, we're doing more of this swelling. Okay, that's sounding pretty good to me. And maybe the next thing is just to add even more, like this is still, even though it's a lot more evolving than when we just had one LFO, we can really make this even a little more chaotic by adding rate modulation with velocity. So now all those velocities I dialed in will change the rate of LFO2, and now it's going to be pretty completely chaotic because I actually played in those notes. So the velocity has no consistent pattern, and now our LFO2 rate is going to be pseudo random. Okay, so I know we spent a lot of time there, but I think this is the part of getting that organic sound that Ben Böhmer has. It's, spend a lot of time just playing with your modulation, get it to sound as organic, as swelling as possible. And now, like I said, we were just focusing on how LFO1 contributes. Now we can bring back in our pluck by enabling envelope 1 modulation, and now we have the pluck plus the LFO. That's where the magic happens. And let's bring up this keyboard tracking. Bring up the cutoff a little bit. And we can bring up this filter modulation just to get a little bit more grittiness. Maybe bring down this noise a little bit. Let's bring the noise down to like 30%. And this is starting to sound pretty good. Let's add our effects back in. Let's add this plate reverb. And the default sounds pretty good. I'll probably just bring the wet down a little bit. And I'm going to add a second effect. I'm going to add this delay. And it's just a little too much. So let's bring that low pass way down, the high pass up a little. And then we can turn our feedback down significantly. And then we already have some vibrato. I guess I think we already have vibrato. I think 50% means there's some. So maybe we can add a little more vibrato. Cool. So yeah, I'm already thinking now the next thing we have to do is start modulating even further outside of what these LFOs can offer. And let's see, I'll hit configure and choose sustain, envelope 1, and we can control the LFO 1 amount as well. So I've got those three things I want to control. The sustain I want to also be kind of pretty random, but I don't want it to be, well, in fact, in Diva, there's no way to tie that with their LFOs, which is kind of the whole problem. It's a little restrictive in what you can modulate. So I'm going to go to Ableton for this and choose a pretty slow LFO and map that to the sustain. Cool. And then I want this rate to sometimes be slow, but I don't want it to always have the same rate. Like I want it to speed up at times. So let's drag a second LFO in. And this one we're going to choose random, also kind of a slow rate, and then map this to the LFO, our first LFO's rate. And we'll want to make that a little more precise. Now this is going to allow this LFO to change its speed. And so we get a little bit more dynamic results. Again, at the expense of, we're never going to exactly recreate what Ben Böhmer did this way. Like if you're introducing randomness, it takes exact recreations off the table, but that's okay. Like what I really want is an organic, evolving patch that I can use in the future. So that's sounding good. And then another thing I want to add is let's add a macro for like opening up the filter, because there's kind of some parts of this song over here that are like, you can almost barely hear the arpeggio compared to like right here. Yeah, just different intensities throughout the song. So let's try and add some controls for that. So over here in our patch we're making, let's add frequency modulation depth, map that to this macro. And then I don't want that ever to be negative, because down here it's our filter going backwards. It's modulating backwards. I want this to sometimes be just static, like it's barely opening up at like 2%. And then the max can be all the way open. That's fine, like 100%-ish. And at the same time, when we're not, when the song is kind of has less energy, I also don't want this LFO to be doing as much. So I'm going to map this frequency modulation to depth also to open. And let's see, I also don't want that to be negative. I want that to start out like small number, like 2 or 3. And it can go all the way up to like 70%. So let's see how we can dial in our automation now. That's sounding pretty good. One other thing is that it seems like the attack is a little bit dynamic as well. So let's also automate that a little bit. So, bring this attack into our parameters we're allowed to automate with Ableton, and I'm going to bring in yet another LFO. And this one I want pretty subtly. I'm actually going to turn its depth way down to like 4%. And then I'm going to map this to the attack. And then I can choose this offset to say like where the attack is now. It's kind of a funny way Ableton works, but it is what it is. Now let's choose a slow rate again. Cool. So yeah, again, I'm dialing in this automation to try and sound evolving. It's not going to exactly match the song. That's okay. But the one thing I do want to match the song with last is let's dial in the automation of this open and kind of have this, even though this patch is evolving kind of on its own, let's at least dial in that it's kind of has less energy here and it builds up. So one way we could do that is to draw in this open amount. Do something, well, not that jagged, but maybe something like that. But that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is we can record it in, and that's a little more fun. So make sure this yellow button in Ableton is enabled, and then, yeah, we can just record this in.
I close my eyes and I begin to see. when we're alone.
Cool. So I think that is what I have for you today. The patch is, I'm happy with it. I'm not trying to line up all the automations. Like I said, I'd rather have something organic that evolves and I can use it in the future. And yeah, I hope you learned something today. If you did, make sure to give it a like and a subscribe, and I will see you next time.